alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave.
Thank you so much for making the effort to be here from Florida to come up to join us and share your insights. You've spent years of study on Screwball Comedy, and particularly Carole Lombard, our star, so thank you very much. I know the audience appreciates it too.
Thank you for having me.
As I explained when I introduced you, I first learned of you from an article, thank you very much, an article, an essay that you'd written, beautifully written about the art of Screwball Comedy and why it still resonates today. From there, I learned of your podcast and the website, which are fantastic. And of course, then that led me to your book, Becoming Carole Lombard. And the book is a revelation. It was so well researched, and there are many things I appreciated about it. Most importantly, that you did not just regurgitate previous film books and research, that you checked everything and you blew up a lot of myths.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fantastic. Also, it is heavily footnoted for film scholars, for people in the industry. However, it's so well written, it's very readable, so film lovers and film buffs can dig and enjoy it too.
Thank you, I hope so, thank you.
One thing that I want to point out to the audience about it and about you and your background is that through your research, you are resetting the narrative about Screwball Comedy. And one thing of note for me is that you are redefining the Screwball heroine and the Screwball man. Previously in film books, almost universally, Screwball heroine is negatively portrayed.
Yeah.
And the men come off even worse. The implication is that if a woman has agency, if she's self-directed, if she's unconventional, then the man must be weak to be with her. And they've even gone so far, some film writers, to say the man is, just by him being with her, he's emasculated.
Yeah.
Or, of course, a term that I've seen bandied around, even to the point of being castrated, calling them male eunuchs, and just very disparaging terms. And your research, your writings celebrate Screwball comedies and celebrate the men and women and their relationships.
Thank you, yeah, and I think it's important to do, and it's a reflection of who Carole Lombard was. She was a very strong woman. I think she had her contract with Paramount from 1930 to 1937, and she, after the contract expired, she was one of the first actresses in Hollywood to go freelance in the late 1930s. It was a very unusual thing to do at the time, very risky. There were negatives to being under contract to a studio, but freelancing gave actors greater opportunity to choose the roles they wanted. They could work when they wanted, for how long they wanted, and Carole forged that path, and she was a great businesswoman as well, and so I think a lot of the attributes that she had as a person, that's really reflected in the types of roles that she played on screen.
Would you please tell us about how this film figures in her overall chronology of films and how it was transformative to her career and to ushering in the genre of screwball comedy?
Definitely. So, as I said in my introduction, Carole originally began working with Max Sennett. She did slapstick comedy, and then she transitioned when she got to Paramount into more sort of glamour girl roles. 20th Century definitely recalibrated her career. She became known as a comedian largely thanks to this role, and subsequently she began to receive roles that were tailor-made to her particular skill set. So, for example, a film that was released shortly after this, which is one of my favorite films of hers, is called Hands Across the Table from 1935. Her first pairing was Fred MacMurray. They made 3 other films after this. It was written specifically for her, and her particular skills as a comedian. And then she followed that up, of course, with My Man Godfrey, Nothing Sacred. Her final role, which was released after she died in 1942, was To Be or Not to Be. So this movie really set her on the path to be known as the queen of screwball comedy. The first ever use of the word screwball in a cinematic context was actually in a 1936 review of My Man Godfrey, and it's specifically used to describe Carole's performance. And I'm paraphrasing, but essentially the reviewer wrote, Carole Lombard has played screwball dames before, but none so screwy as this one, referring to her character Irene Bullock. So there are other actresses who performed in screwball comedies, but Carole Lombard was the most closely associated with the genre.
In the film, we see Carole Lombard so physical, and in your book, you really take a deep dive into that, and you talk about that Carole Lombard embodies both male physical comedy and uber femininity for this dynamic combination. Can you expound a little on that for us?
Sure. So typically I've even found in academic writing on physical comedy, writers tend to associate physical comedy with male comedians like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, and some of them even go so far as to say that the actresses who perform physical comedy were somehow unladylike or unfeminine. And I think Carole Lombard does both. She is ultra glamorous, she's beautiful, and yet she's able to perform these very physical scenes with ease, and she keeps up with her male co-stars, and I don't think there has to be a compromise between one or the other, and she definitely does both effortlessly.
In your book, you write about Carole Lombard's off-screen persona, how it was developed and mirrored what was going on in her film career. Would you please tell us a little about her marriages and how they affected the way the public perceived her, and how, with her screwball comedy success and her self-direction professionally, how that changed how the public perceived her personally?
So Carole was married twice, first to William Powell from 1931 to 1933, and second to Clark Gable from 1939 to 1942 when she died. Actually, I don't know if you noticed in this movie, the ring that she wears throughout the film is actually the ring that William Powell bought her when they got engaged. It was this blue star sapphire. She wore that all throughout their marriage, and even after they divorced, they remained very good friends. She kept that long after the marriage ended. At the time that this film was released, she was just coming out of that first marriage, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with William Powell, most famously played Nick Charles in The Thin Man, so he had a very sophisticated, suave star persona, and around that time, by virtue of just being married to William Powell, Carole took on a lot of those attributes in terms of her star persona. So they represented this very chic, sophisticated star couple. And then conversely, when she became associated with Clark Gable, he was much more rugged, he's this outdoorsman, he loved to hunt, fish, and Carole really sort of rehabilitated her life to accommodate him. She became a very proficient skeet shooter, she loved to go hunting and fishing with him, and so she became a lot more had a more down-to-earth, sort of casual persona, and so you can see this evolution in her image over just this very short period of time, less than a decade.
Let's talk for a moment about the ending of this. And of course, it's very circular. We start off with them on the stage, and Oscar is charting out the chalk marks on the floor. We end the same way. It seems ambiguous to me, and I love that about screwball comedy, because unlike romantic comedy, which is all nice and idealized and pat, you have satire, spoofs, you have these people, and they're very real. The antagonism and the conflict is very real. How do you interpret the ending?
Well, as you said, I think it is a little ambiguous because, unlike the first scene where she's still Mildred Plotka, she's sort of unsure of herself, she's finding her footing, here she is Lily Garland. She's really become a little mini Oscar Jaffe, right? And so she has the ego to match, and she's much more confident. So she's pushing back on him a little more. She's not really happy with the chalk mark. She says, I'm an actress, I know what I'm doing, right? So, you don't know where their relationship is going to go. She's tied to him in a contract, but, I think he might get a little more pushback this time around.
And you do see that she is giving as good as she gets. She's on equal footing with him, and that's what, of course, makes her a screwball heroine. We have talked about Carole Lombard's huge role in ushering in the screwball comedy, but we must speak for a moment about Howard Hawks, the great director. He, of course, excelled in many genres of film, but he is probably best known today for his screwball comedies. And share with us a little about his background and particularly what attributes of film making that he brought in that aided the development of screwball comedy.
So Hawks really ushered in what has now been called the Hawksian Woman. It's very much similar to the screwball heroine. It's a female character who's very strong-willed. She can hang with the men in her life, and yet she's still very feminine. And I think that very much describes the screwball woman that we see. Hawks himself, you see it in this film a little bit, and definitely more so in his later screwball comedies like His Girl Friday and one of my favorites, Ball of Fire. He really emphasized sort of the natural approach to acting. It's very different from theatrical acting. One of the things he developed is overlapping dialogue, where characters will, interrupt another actor. They'll interject, and it's very much mirroring how we talk in real life. And you see that a lot in His Girl Friday, and I encourage you, if you haven't watched that movie yet, please do seek it out. It's probably his crowning achievement in his career.
And in addition to the overlapping dialogue, the pacing is very fast. The witty dialogue and the energy and the conflict between the men and women. He seemed to be fascinated by women, a supporter of women. In his women are very strong and independent, but yet it's the yin and the yang. We have to have our partners in life. I'd like to end today, if we could, talk a little bit about John Barrymore. He is so outstanding in this role. You mentioned in your introduction, of course, another great role that he acted with Carole Lombard. Share with us a little about your impressions of John Barrymore.
Oh, I just love him. I think, as I said in my introduction, I think this film is John Barrymore's film. He's just so audacious, and he gives everything to this performance. And Carole's great too, of course, but it's a John Barrymore film. Of course, he's, I think, most well known for his dramatic roles and for his Shakespearean performances, but he was a great comedian. 20th Century is a great example, True Confession, I should say, is a great example. He's kooky, his character is very off the wall, and he embodies that so well. And Aliece and I were talking a few weeks ago, another great comedy performance of his is Midnight, a Mitchell Leisner film written by Billy Wilder, sort of in the style of Ernst Lubitsch. It's a Leisner film sort of doing Lubitsch, and he's just so great. He's such a versatile actor, and not phony in any sense. His character is a ham, but you don't feel like it's an inauthentic performance, and I think that's such a great quality that he brings to his comedic performances.
And looking at him, the way he lets the hair go wild, the physical movements, that's the thing. The beautiful people in screwball comedy, unlike other genres, they are getting the laughs, they are the butt of the jokes, and they're made to look foolish, and we love them for it.
Let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous. Let's misbehave. When Adam won Eve's hand, he wouldn't stand for teasing. He didn't care about those apples out of season. They say the spring means just one thing to little lovebirds.